Good. All right, this spotlight is on you.
Thank you. So I'm going to just turn off my camera as well. So hi, everyone. Welcome. First off, thanks for attending the session. My name is Jonathan Critchley, and I'm joining from Toronto. Today, I'll be exploring using 3D web-based maps to represent simplified versions of the built environment using a fairly straightforward method of extruding building footprints by a height value, and then also using color to represent relationships to one or multiple policy datasets. I'll be showing some inspirations, personal experiments, and some work-related maps I produced where I've been able to experiment with these concepts. Generally, these maps are interactive, and you can find some of the live examples on my website, linked from my profile. But today I'm just going to, for the sake of presentation, just show some images. So I started out as an urban planner and was drawn to maps doing storm surge and sea level rise, modeling and mapping in communities around Nova Scotia at Dalhousie University. I've had many other experiences since as a planner where maps have been an essential tool to educate and communicate. And a highlight was working on the Toronto Road Boundary Review, where it's really important to help clearly communicate how boundaries might change. These experiences have emphasized the importance of the role as urban planners play as educators. It's not quite enough to create policy. You also have to sell it to decision makers and the public and help educate on changes and benefits, requiring clear and accessible materials to help. Nowadays, I'm a web developer with a focus on location technology, and I've been working in the prop tech scene and commercial real estate space, building custom web-based services, designing maps and intuitive interactive interfaces around them, as well as thinking of ways of combining data to derive new value and insight. A major inspiration for a lot of side projects I pick up has been Twitter, where I was able to find other people around the world doing work that inspired me. And generally, I start to reverse engineer and learn how to build similar things. Around 2015, building height maps were pretty popular. And they started out as basic 2D representations of building footprints, color-coded to height values. There are a few different examples that emerged where data existed. Here we have an example from Melbourne, Australia. And here we have from London, England. Well, they're fairly simple maps. I find there's a beauty in the pattern that emerge at different zoom levels, and web maps really lend themselves well to allowing exploration of the data sets. So I was inspired by these maps and wanted to figure out how to create similar versions of my own. Unfortunately, living in Toronto, I had perfectly formatted data to get going. I really have to give props to the City of Toronto for the commitment to quality, quantity, and maintenance of what they released through the Open Data program. They provide a building footprint shapefile with height properties for each footprint, and they are committed to updating that yearly. I was also fortunate to have been exposed to the open data and open source movements during my master's at Ryerson and the Master's Spatial Analysis program. And both of those have contributed a lot to my career. Most importantly, just allowed me to experiment and do fun things with spatial data and maps in my free time. Open data has offered the opportunity to access large complex data sets I could play with and think of interesting ways to represent and make them interactive, but also different ways to combine with other data sets to derive new value and insight. There's a few clear patterns that emerged in this height map, simply styling the footprints by heights. And I wanted other interesting things to do with the map and data to explore those patterns. So I knew that there are other interesting data sources available through open data that could also be combined with the footprints like the zoning bylaw categories. I figured at a minimum I could join and expose zoning categories to each building and provide the information to pop up. And just a quick refresher for people, zoning bylaw is a set of policy that controls the use of land, where buildings and other structures can be located, type of buildings, lot sizes and dimension, building heights and setbacks from the streets. So at the time I was using a spatial data hosting service called Carto for the height map. They host and sort of do a lot of the background sort of complicated sort of work in making these maps fluid and load very quickly. And at the time, they provided the ability to create 2.5D extrusions, which I experimented with, but ultimately ran into many issues with the styling. And also, there's a number of issues with how the features, as they were extruded, actually overlaid and intersected with each other. And they generally look best as static images. I did help, like the experiment helped to start to formulate how styling the building footprints using extrusions and by color corresponding to zoning bylaw categories helped expose additional patterns, and was also just a fun way to look at the built environment policy data and visualize the relationships between the two. In 2016, Mapbox released the ability to extrude polygons with their Mapbox JavaScript API. And this opened the door to creating new fully 3D maps using the same data I'd been working with before. A lot of the work I do with maps nowadays, I tend to write code to create them, but it's worth highlighting that Mapbox has a very accessible studio service where it's possible to add and style data, including the ability to create these extrusion styles using a user interface, so you're not tied to writing code. So with the ability to re-explore the data again, but now in 3D, I felt the maps benefited from adding the policy area polygon data to show the extents of the policy area. And the extrusion styling really helped the buildings stand out, and they're easily distinguishable from one another. So one of the things I'm constantly impressed with is the amount of data that can be displayed in these interactive web maps and retaining the general height patterns as you zoom out of the map. So it's just a fake demonstration, but just, as you zoom further out in the map, the ability to distinguish those building extrusions it clearly helps tie the different land use and built form that the policy has sort of dictated is allowed in these sites. So I just figured, coming from that view and just going back, comparing with a traditional zoning map, like the City of Toronto zoning bylaw one, this is a great resource and it's functional, but it really just serves as a single purpose to provide access to one layer with additional information about our area when you click on the map. And it can struggle at being accessible even showing one single layer clearly. And just sort of finally, as sort of ultimately, bringing all of these different ideas and concepts together, the extruded buildings and policy areas. As a side project at one of my previous jobs, I helped create a development opportunity map in the City of Toronto. And this was an attempt to visualize development opportunity based on current planning policy framework. So we identified three main indicators to develop indicators of development potential within the City of Toronto. So these were areas the province designated for intensification. So those were provincially designated urban growth center areas, transit supportive development areas. At the time, we were using 500-meter circular buffers around major transit stations, and then areas designated with land use by the city, allowing higher density development. And we created a ranking where darker blue represented presence of all three policy and lighter blue colors, one policy, two or one policy, and then the white areas just that policy didn't exist. And then highlighted yellow areas where we considered missed opportunities where official plan land use does not allow for higher density development and within walking distance to transit. It was a fun exercise and helped demonstrate while there is all this data and policy out there, putting effort into highlighting how policy areas align and intersect can help clearly identify constraints and opportunity areas. An interesting takeaway from just sort of to close, an interesting takeaway from the exercise was highlighting areas that represent the best opportunity for intensification based on this policy tend to already be fairly built up. And while you can sort of overlay these layers, it's sort of the exercise we undertook was really highlighting that, and it's really easy to convey the developments that already exist using the 3D. I've enjoyed the opportunity using 3D and interactive web-based maps as a way of revisiting traditional maps and considering new ways to present them with new tech and combined with additional data sets just to sort of bring new understanding to policy. The maps are fairly simple. They don't need ultra-realistic imagery, and the shapes of the buildings themselves, they're a very simplified representation, but it's still what I consider quite useful and accessible to a lot of people. So it was a lightning talk as well, so I'll cut it there. But thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks, Jonathan. That was awesome. Thank you so much for your time as well. Beautiful work again, like everybody here, really. Yeah, you're right that using 3D, I don't think I've done that yet. So yeah, really impressive. The power of 2.5D slash 3D. I agree. Yeah, I'm looking at your work and that makes me think that I should start using 3D as well.
Well, it's been it's sort of an argument that I've had with other people, the benefits of 3D and maps, and the sort of representing the built environment really is one of those use cases where it makes a lot of sense. And using tools like Carto and Mapbox and also access to the open data sets is just, there's very little barrier for entry and just sort of allowed experimentation and sort of something that I played around with over time and sort of being able to introduce at work, but then also just play around with personally.
Yeah, for sure. Super cool. No, like the amount of data out there, it's incredible now. It was even like 10 years ago when I was at COGS, or 9 years ago when I was at COGS, like there was already so much data, but now it's incredible. Claire Selden says, great to see Toronto from that angle too. Yes, I agree. Absolutely, not just from top down, up, or up from down, like in 2 dimensions. Any other questions for Jonathan? Yeah, let's see.
Well, my website was also added to my profile. So if anybody wants to check out some of these maps, some of them don't actually exist. I just have sort of photo records of them, but the other ones are sort of scattered throughout my website, and similar, other concepts of using open data, urban data.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check out your websites. Blair Scriven, I think, sorry if I didn't pronounce your name right, said, with Mapbox, can you create a 3D map that can be incorporated into a VR system?
Not necessarily directly with the web-based viewer, but they do have a Unity plugin. And I've not experimented with myself, but it's sort of AR, VR capabilities sort of are possible through what the Unity engine can provide.
Yeah, maybe one day. That probably takes a lot of data, a lot of power too.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's impressive what Mapbox is doing more and more. They've now sort of got 3D terrain. And it's not quite the level of the building footprints that I'm using. It's just sort of the ability to pre-process them on my own computer before I upload them, join attributes. But Mapbox also provides just a simplified building layer as well, based on open source, OpenStreetMap and other sources that you can add to your projects as well. So if you have urban based maps, you can just sort of add it easily as a layer.
Mm-hmm. No, super cool. I agree with Glenn Brown, my co-event admin. Interesting session. Thanks to all speakers. Yes, this was really interesting. Very creative. The amount of brain power in the work that all the presenters have done is quite amazing. So thank you all, and please go check out the exhibit hall and the poster sessions on the left-hand side. There's a lot of good work there as well to check out. And I invite everybody to join the Day 3, Session 3, Mapping the Pandemic, in about 10 minutes. It'll go live in about 10 minutes. So thank you so much, everybody, and thank you, Jonathan, and all the other speakers of this session, and have a great rest of the conference.